Recently, I was talking to a friend about their new music video project. They're trying to describe the aesthetic of the project to me. And eventually they just say, you know what, Morgana, the details don't really matter. All you need to know is that it's like Wes Anderson meets Neon Demon. Now I'm noticing this pattern, and the issue is that more often than not, other movies are our main vocabulary when discussing and establishing aesthetic for our own projects. We essentially copy what other filmmakers do to achieve the exact same feeling. When we want to talk about quirky symmetrical framing, we choose to reference Wes Anderson. But by referencing the source material, like the actual film stills, rather than what lies behind the source material, like the references themselves, we're never going to escape this cycle of copying each other's films. And part of what I want to do today is challenge our critical thinking for approach so that we can continue to create original and unique content rather than unintentional remixes of our favorite films. And if you need an example, I think the new Dune trailer is a great one. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Denis Villeneuve fan, and I honestly hope the movie's great, but everything I've seen so far has been really disappointing. We can see direct references to Blade Runner 2049, The Matrix, and even the last Dune movie. I mean, the entire ensemble cast kind of feels like a reference to the most popular films of the last 5 years. And to top it all off, somebody actually made a side-by-side comparison that shows the new Dune trailer is almost exactly like the old one. And sure, maybe this seems reasonable to you. I mean, yeah, it is a remake after all, and this is just the trailer. But part of what I want to do today is challenge that thought. Is it acceptable? When and why do we deem this as storytelling? I think we reference other movies because it's easy, and referencing something new is hard. And I want to agree with that because the process of finding and sourcing your own references is really daunting. How many times have you struggled to articulate a feeling or a visual to someone else, so much so that you just gave up and referenced another film? That's why I don't think our resources are necessarily doing us any favors either. FilmGrab is a great example. It's an online stills library with nearly 2,000 films and almost 1 million images. And having a database, a search engine, arguably, that allows you to pick through your films from hand-picked, curated stills seems kind of handy. But I can't really help but wonder if we're using these tools wrong, and how much of FilmGrab's curated state is actually pigeonholing our creative outlook without us knowing. Because we're still picking from someone else's curated selection. And I don't think the minutia of our personal taste should be built upon the basis of someone else's curated gallery. So we could take a look at other artistic disciplines for inspiration and see the routine for process that they've set up for themselves. Painters are a great example because painters have a very critical eye for observation and technique, so much so that it almost feels like a prerequisite to making great art. I mean, simply put, painters do not copy other painters. They paint from feeling, from experience, and most of all, a patience for observation. They have a patience for process. Right around now, you might be thinking about that Picasso quote, "Good artists copy and great artists steal." Well, that's exactly my point, because copy means imitating out of convenience, whereas steal is an entirely different process of learning and understanding what you like and why you like it. Now you can take it farther. It's something entirely new, even your own. So what about other artistic disciplines? There's theater actors who rehearse tirelessly before the actual show, or musicians and composers who have a deep understanding of musical vocabulary to build up entire symphonies from tiny building blocks. Musicians understand that the right creative references are composable. Small ideas combine nicely, and enough of them are the basis for a larger work. But entire movies, again, think Wes Anderson meets Neon Demon, those aren't composable ideas. So we should stop trying to jam them together as if they are. So it's clear that in each of these other art forms, there's a clear focus on critical thinking for process. And in my opinion, that kind of consideration is a step in the right direction to maximizing your opportunity to create great art. Elizabeth Gilbert has an awesome quote that really speaks to the point that I'm trying to make. She says, "Great art should be both surprising and inevitable." The idea that you never would have expected this to be the solution, but now that I'm here, it most certainly is. I think that's a great point. Isn't achieving that state of awe what we're all working towards? But that awe, that serendipity, really, that Elizabeth is talking about, is only achievable with relentless work at self-discovery. Because serendipity is so much more than dumb chance luck that you fall into. Serendipity is a deep understanding of self. It's something that you actively do. So we can't wait for the world to change, because a film movement for creative approach is not coming. But we don't have to push for one, because the goal here is to create your own tools for your own system of process. Take a deeper look at your process and discipline for any given project. For myself, as a cinematographer, I find myself making mood boards and pitch decks all the time. So I think that's a great example to start with. Why don't we start with the Wes Anderson meets Neon Demon idea? We're making the music video pitch deck. Start with an awesome title card, and, well, we do the obvious. We source from Neon Demon, some more Neon Demon, and then eventually we add some Wes Anderson stills. Now, at this point in the process, I can sort of start to remember that there's some film and some scene I want to reference, but God, I didn't write it down after I watched it, and I really need to send this in by 5 p.m., so I'm just going to add some more Wes Anderson stills and call it a day. Hopefully, I'm reminding you that the process of finding references can sort of feel like this endless cycle of sorting through heaps of material that we're all too familiar with. And familiarity is comforting. In this example, Wes Anderson and Neon Demon are comforting. I technically finished the pitch deck on time and I sent it to the director, and they also happen to love both Wes Anderson and Neon Demon. So we're both comforted. But I really want to stress that comforting does not create exciting work. Comforting masks the reality that I'm actually ill-prepared to make this pitch deck right now. Because if you wait to find references until the moment that you need them, you're screwed. Suddenly there's very little opportunity for serendipity, because it's so easy to reference other movies when in a rush and focused on product. So we can preempt this entire trend by setting up tools for ourselves beforehand to maximize how often you stumble across that reference you want. What we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize the serendipity of the process for ourselves. Because could this process have been better? Yes, it could have been way better. So let's try it again. Except this time, I'm going to challenge myself to dive deeper and have patience with process instead of fixating on product. When I feel myself at a loss for ideas and tempted to click on these Wes Anderson stills yet again, I'm going to take a step back and ask, why is it that I'm referencing Wes Anderson yet again? So I'll come up with 5 words that evoke the feeling, tone, or texture of the still. I come up with some sayings like hard light, selective color palette, rich skies, and shapes with frames. Now I try and decide why I like them together and why they combine well together. I'm surprised, but I actually remember this photo from my camping trip that I took a few weeks ago. It works perfectly for the reference of rich skies. Fantastic, I'll add that. I know my mom sent me an old photo that was processed really weird. It works perfect for selective color palette. I'll add that. Or how about this photo from a party last year? I'll add that. Now that I think about it, this sticky note sitting on my computer is an awesome lighting idea. So think back to what I said about preempting the trend, because there are many ways that we can preempt the trend. Maybe it's not like this. Maybe you have a stills library set up for yourself, a personal database of your own reference stills, but they're all searchable via keyword, completely unique to your product. Or maybe you're not a filmmaker. Maybe you're a writer and a comedian. So you keep notebooks with you at all times to jot down aimless thoughts and ideas, doodles, even random bits of conversation that you've overheard. Sure, things like this at the beginning can be very disorganized, but that doesn't really matter, because the point is you're building up a culmination, your own library of you and your life experiences. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to collect things that we know combine well with other things. And that comes from collecting things that have small things that we like about them. Maybe it's a texture of a piece of furniture, or a certain quality of light, or the way your friend said that really funny joke that surprised you. These don't have to just be visual things. And I'm not saying that movie references should be written off as inspiration entirely because movies shouldn't look like movies. That's not it at all. Movie references are great for very specific filmmaking considerations like color grading and framing composition. But what they're not great for is developing visual symbolism that feels rooted to story. That comes from real photos and real material. So I encourage you to go take your own references. Rehearse your frames often with your friends, your mom. Do it on your phone. Be curious and ask yourself these same questions. So reflecting back on the two sort of wonky examples of a pitch deck, I want to say that the first one looks great, but it looks great in part because it's comfortable. There's that word again. It's comfortable in part because it's not my work. Whereas the second deck, I mean, it's very far from comfortable. At first, it feels not at all like Wes Anderson meets Neon Demon. But as a result, I actually understand the content more deeply. And for the first time, I can actually describe the minutia of that taste to both myself and my collaborator. This isn't to say that I don't appreciate the first pitch deck of completely Wes Anderson and Neon Demon stills, because I do. But the issue is that it's a collage of someone else's understandings. And that kind of collage pales in comparison to a deep understanding of self. So you might say, well, the second deck, it still isn't done. And it took you twice as long to do. And I realize that. I think time is a great point to bring up. Because to achieve serendipity, I believe you have to be willing to risk productivity. Understand that unproductive days, in the sense of not having something complete to show by 5 p.m., are important for improving on your creative process. If that means that you need to schedule more time outside of your workday for personal creative play, or God forbid, ask for more time on a deadline, then you should. Because this whole process of creating and learning should be about serendipity, not this weird fixation that we have on product and end result. So anyways, I'm not saying that this is how you should approach your process, because this talk is not meant to be a how-to. And I also realize a lot of the examples I brought up are heavily related to pitch decks and visual references. But I want to remind everyone that that's just a familiar example plucked from a huge range of work that we do as filmmakers. I am saying that we need to look more into our creative process and be critical for our approach as filmmakers and within our industry. Because investing in your very own personal creative discipline means that you don't need to start from blank pages every time. Why have the pressure to reinvent the wheel every single time that you make a movie when you can instead set yourself up for success in advance with the tools, so that by the time you're ready to go, it's only about assembly? And by learning how to actively improve our creative processes, that actually means that we can start to share that back with the community. And that's really important, because when was the last time you got to read a draft that Charlie Kaufman threw out, or saw the 60 takes that David Fincher didn't use? My point is, in a digital age where TikTok, reigns digital storytelling, why aren't we sharing process? How is it that we know more about the processes of dead Renaissance painters than the processes of contemporary filmmakers? Picasso didn't have the internet, but we do. So what's our excuse? I'm a believer that to do any of this, you need to be able to take pleasure in process. And Austin Kleon has a really great excerpt from his book called Show Your Work that I think paints a perfect picture of what I'm trying to say. So when a painter talks about her work, she could be talking about two different things. There's the artwork, the finished piece, framed and hung on a gallery wall. And then there's the artwork, all the day-to-day stuff that goes on behind the scenes in her studio, looking for inspiration, getting an idea, applying oil to a canvas, etc. There's painting the noun, and then there's painting the verb. As in all kinds of work, there is a distinction between the painter's process and the products of her process. And I think we fall victim to painting the noun because we've convinced ourselves that the details and minutiae of our process are irrelevant. But if we shed that idea and shared process instead of product, we'd be able to develop a new relationship with not only our personal discipline, but also our audience. Because maybe there's more art in what you do and how you do it than art itself. So we need to reframe our thinking from being hyper-focused on product and attempt to give form to our inner worlds without copying from something else or someone else. When you spot something small and composable, don't let it go. Take the opportunity to give it place in your own curated gallery. Because though you spot this stuff, only you know what to do with it and how it can be helpful for you in the future. So be attentive, be curious, and most of all, practice. Because none of this is about making the next Oscar-winning film. I think it's important to remind ourselves that if we want to be interesting, we have to first be interested. Thank you.